living sober, busy living sober, busy living sober. I am so excited, you guys. I have Georgie Humphrey on, who's somebody I've been following on Instagram. And the reason she caught my eye is not only is she sober, she has ADD. She's beautiful. She's a mom. She's a coach. She's like a lot of us out there that are trying to juggle so many things in this world. We're like, oh my gosh, am I doing anything right? How are you?
Oh
Thank
my
you so much.
gosh. Thank you so much. I feel so honored to be here. And that introduction, it's just beautiful. I love your energy. Thank you. I'm really happy to be here today.
I'm just thrilled that we finally made it happen.
We
And so,
did.
oh my gosh, it's amazing. So tell me this. Will you tell us what your story is all about and how you came, what brought you to Instagram in the beginning, how you decided to be so transparent? Tell us what happened.
Oh, thank you, Elizabeth. Well, thank you for that glorious introduction. I love a bit of a musical intro. Um, yeah, so as you said, I'm a mum of three boys. I've got three boys under 13. So life is hectic. I have been or was a massive boozer from a very young age. Much like yourself, I've been deep diving a bit of Elizabeth's world, loving it. Obviously, I leave everything to the last minute. So I listened to about 7 of your podcasts last night. So I feel like I'm kind of living in your world and I love it. And I know you started drinking very young as well. And yeah, it really went from booze being this total elixir of joy and fun. And it was like this total shortcut to a really outgoing, confident personality. I then got kind of caught up in the 90s rave scene in Liverpool. So it was booze and recreational drugs, and it was all going on. And then I kind of really went on, left the rave scene behind. But obviously, booze is the big, sanctioned, legal, everyone's at it, fill your boots kind of high. And so, really, throughout my 20s and 30s, a lot of them, I sought out booze. I sought out jobs that allowed me to drink. I sort of worked for a big London restaurant and bar guide for many, many years, where I was really their drinks promotion manager. So I did the sponsorship deals with the big alcohol companies, the dark side of big alcohol. And I was right there. I was sort of sitting in Diageo and Pernod Ricard and doing the sort of contra deals with the gin companies. I mean, awful. And at no point in that process did I think, God, I am doing something really terrible. Because I was in my 20s. I was out partying every night. I was drinking the drinks. I was living the life. I couldn't really see any dark side to alcohol back then because it was all great, right? And even sort of sitting in boardrooms talking about how we could market gin to mums as an untapped market is just makes every cell in my body just cry in horror now. But back then, when you're 20 years old and you're not a mum yourself and you don't really see the other side of what alcohol is doing, you don't even think about it. It's like you're working on the Death Star, but you're just a contractor who's, you just don't see it for what it is. So anyway, long story short, Elizabeth, I had my kids, and really then I realized that I wasn't drinking for fun anymore. It wasn't an elixir of joy. It really just become an anesthetic to get through the day. And as you know, the more you drink, the more your tolerance builds, and you're chasing a high that just doesn't exist anymore. And before you know it, you're drinking, half a bottle of wine before you've even started bath time. So I've been sober now for coming up to 4.5 years. Yeah, I timed it with the lockdown. Thank God I got sober just before COVID and everything else struck. And really that was my saving grace, because then we obviously went straight into homeschooling, and to even imagine how that would have played out if I was still drinking just fills me with doom. And yeah, I started my Instagram account back then, just kind of pictures and old school sort of journaling almost. My son, sorry, I'm really giving you the two pence worth. I will bring us up to date any minute now. My son was diagnosed with ADHD about 2 years ago. And that sort of sent me into this huge sort of rabbit hole of exploration about ADHD, when I suddenly realized that girls who knew it present very differently to boys. And the link between ADHD and addiction. And suddenly my whole life made sense. So that's been my journey. That's also why I changed my name on Instagram from Painting the Town Sober, which is who I thought I was, all about going out and just, being the party girl. And over time, I kind of realized I wasn't really that kind of person. I was just absolutely hammered all the time. And really, my personality, it transpires, is something completely different. So to say it's been a journey is an understatement.
Well, it's for one, it's amazing that you got here. And our stories are really similar because I ended up going and being a sommelier. I learned how to sell wine when I was drinking. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to be this really great, I'm going to sell wine to people. We're going to make it really. I mean, I was the total party girl like you were. And I also have three children. I just have a girl in the middle. And it's so crazy. And I got sober when my oldest was 10, yours was 8. Correct?
Correct. Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
I just did the math in my head as quickly. And so this journey has been for them. What do you think it's been like for your kids? Isn't it interesting to watch them now?
Do you know what? It's so interesting you say that. I thank God that I did get sober before they had any core memories of what I was like drunk. We went to, we were at a big sort of family event recently. And there was quite a few of the young uns who were not in any way, sloppy or worrying, but, just drunk on the dance floor and just being a little bit more over cuddly and nothing worried. But all three of my boys were like, oh my gosh, I have never seen, because they haven't been around drunk people. And not that I have any judgment about that. I absolutely support people living their own life. These aren't people, exhibiting problems. But it was so interesting that my kids have been so sort of protected from that they don't really have any memory of it. And I thank God for that, Elizabeth, because I was a sloppy drunk, not aggressive or inappropriate, but just sloppy, got louder and louder, and wooden spoons and dancing on tables and everyone get involved, which I try to do now sober. And sometimes, I can pull it off, because if you're kind of in the swing of it's all great. But it's just not having that cut-off point, is it? Not knowing when to stop, not knowing when to go home, not knowing when you're reading someone's signals that they might not really be as into the party as you think they are. And I just thank God that I stopped when I did. I really do. How old were your kids when you stopped?
So my oldest was 10, my daughter was 8, and my baby was 6, because they're
Wow.
15 months apart and then 25 months apart. But it's really interesting because when I started drinking at 13, right, I used to look at my mom and be like, I can't wait till I can be like her, right? Put on
Mm,
the pretty dress, have the glass, have the pretty glass and be really happy, right? Mom was
yeah,
really happy
yeah,
when she had the alcohol.
yeah,
And that's what I assimilated it with. And
yeah,
to give our kids a different point of view is
yeah.
just amazing.
Yeah, yeah. Do you know what? You're so right. And I had all the same associations with alcohol. I mean, it goes right back to like old Hollywood, doesn't it? Like all of sort of like
Mhm.
glamorous beauties, the screen icons with their glasses. But obviously, and that side, and I do remember being drunk around my kids when I was drinking, and I'd be the mum that was like, "Come on, let's do karaoke, let's put on the music," and it does look great for that little snippet. But what you're not showing is the next day, right? When you're trying to be on the school run, like shoving chewing gum in your mouth, just like there are times when I was on a school run with, and it's gross to say, and it's full shame, with a plastic bag, because I was just like, I just don't know, I could vomit on this school run. I did school trips when my eldest was young, when I had to stop at a well, the bus was stopping at a service station, and thank God I made it, where I had to like vomit in a service station toilet because I was so ill. And that's when I tripped to the bloody zoo. And this is the side of women's drinking that I think, and men's drinking as well, but I think men and women often drink differently. And in women's case, they oftentimes we have to go to work the next day, we have to do this kids' school run, we have to go on the bloody school trip. We are so front facing all the time. You can't shy away from that stuff. You just got to keep on doing it, even if you are vomiting in a motorway service station. And I think that was the balance for me that just started going down and down and down. It's like what it was taking from me was so much more than it was giving me.
And it's so interesting because was the end of my drinking, it wasn't like I had, I say this all the time. I didn't have handcuffs around me. There were no
Yeah.
sirens chasing me. I still had a car in the driveway. I still had a house and all that. And my kids, thank God. I did have a broken up marriage. It doesn't sound like your marriage broke up, which you're so blessed. You must be so grateful for that.
I
So,
am. No, I
so
am.
what was the end like? You just woke up one day? What happened?
So I didn't have that famous kind of rock bottom moment that you're describing, that you didn't have either. You still,
No.
and I think for lots of people, I think sometimes that can be a real misnomer, because people are sort of like, well, I'm just going to wait for that rock bottom moment and then I'll get sober. And, it's kind of like, well, I'll wait till I crash the car, or and actually for me, it was just this really slow, steady decline. And what really, really amped it up was I did lots of those kind of like trial sobriety periods, which I encourage anyone who is sober curious to do. So I did a dry January, a sober October, a 90-day challenge. And what I realized off the back of doing those kind of stints of sobriety was, when it came to the end of them, I was like, I can do it. Yes, I can stop drinking for a month. And then I hit it hard and I hit it fast. And every time I did a sober period, when I went back to drinking, it got worse. And during my last, the last stint I did was a sober October. And then I went back to drinking in November. And then I carried on drinking into the December, which is obviously then we're pre-Christmas. And during that last month, Elizabeth, I will never forget, there was one particular night, nothing terrible happened, there were no outward consequences, but we were meant to be going out as a family. And I just said, I can't go. I can't, because by that stage, the anxiety, the depression, all of the kind of bedfellows of alcoholism were all rising in me. I didn't even want to go out anymore, because I knew that I would be observed. My drinking would then be out on display. And this one particular night, just before New Year's Eve, I think I drank 3 bottles of wine in a very short period. And I filmed myself, which is another thing that I encourage anyone sober curious to do if they want to do it. And I filmed myself talking to myself. And I was saying to myself then, and I've watched it back a few times now. It took me a long time to feel strong enough to watch it back. And watching it back now, the hollow deadness in my eyes, the sheer desperation. And I knew that night that if I didn't stop, I knew that I'd gone so far that if I didn't stop, I would either die slowly and miserably and just descend into alcoholism. Or you remember how it is when you were drinking all the time, how you always thought that, oh my God, is that my liver? Is that cirrhosis? Is that gout? Is there any sort of pain or ache? It had to be related to alcohol. It well could have been, but I just had to take that feeling away. And it was the January, another dry January, but I said, I will never, ever drink again. And I just, for some reason, something rose in me, something primeval just knew that if I didn't take this shot, it would be a very different ending for me and my family and my kids, and everything just kind of came into view. And I don't know where it came from. I felt like it rose from inside me, like a sort of a knowing, a knowledge, like something that maybe was always there. Maybe the kind of spiritual element that I'd love to talk to you about that, though, because I know you sort of came up the AA route, which I didn't. And I'd love to sort of hear some of your views, because you did the meetings, you did the 12 steps. How was that for you?
Well, it's so interesting that you talked, but my ending was kind of like yours, in
Yeah,
that I was like, I woke up one day and I had been and I knew that I had had a problem, right? I knew that probably I drank too much and that I was
yes,
an
yes,
alcoholic. And
yeah,
mind you, I was raised with 2 grandmothers that were alcoholics that my parents would talk about in a way, even though they were so successful. I mean,
yeah,
they beautiful, right? Right
yeah,
social things, but they would be like, they're alcoholics, they're alcoholics. So I knew that I thought an alcoholic was like having a horrible, horrible, horrible thing.
yeah.
So I didn't want to be one because I didn't think there was a solution. You were just going to drink till you die, right?
Of course,
So
yeah, yeah,
so that was one thing. Then I have 2 siblings that got sober. So I knew what AA was. Now again, this is in 2006. There
yeah,
was no internet. There was an internet, but not like it is today. There was
yeah,
no
yeah,
social media or anything like that. So there was no option. I went for a run the night after I drank a lot, and I was literally sitting on the end of the dock of the bay on the water in New Jersey, and and on the Atlantic Ocean, and I just said, I woke up the next day and I went for a run, and I'm not even a runner. And I got up and I just said, I can't do this anymore.
Wow.
And it's kind of like you described. And I think about it sometimes because it's been almost 18 years. And I'm like, what was it? That spiritual thing you just
Yeah.
described. It's like a spiritual thing. It's like you get to this place that you're just like, I'm done.
Yes, exactly that. Exactly that. And I also I also felt there was something almost primeval about it. And this sounds weird, it's very hard to articulate, but I really felt like the cells in my body were just screaming, stop. Like even the physical cells, it felt like every single part of me was in alliance that if I didn't stop this thing, it was going to take us down mentally, physically, the whole shebang. And I thank like God, the universe, and everything for that moment. That it sounds like we had a very sort of similar
We
thing because
did. And for me, I didn't, so I went home and I'm very social,
yeah,
right? So I'm like, I can't go to where I used to go, which is the bars and all these
yeah,
parties, right? So
yes.
what am I gonna do? What am I
So
gonna
what did
do?
you
I
do?
went to an AA meeting. I went to a
So
12 step.
how did you what's that process like? Because how did you even, like you say, kind of pre-social media burst, how where do you even start with that? Like did you know someone? Did you like how where do you
Well, I
start
will
with that
tell
whole
you, my sister, okay, as I mentioned, I have two siblings that were sober at the time, went a long time ago. And so my sister married a guy who has now, he might have almost 40 years of sobriety. And he's our age. Okay. So he's literally our age. So he got sober very, very young.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I went to him and I said, I'm quitting. And he said, No, you're not. And I said, Yes, I am. And he's like, You're because everybody thought I was like the party girl, right? I was like you.
yeah,
I was
yeah,
on with the band. I'm like, I can sing, I can dance. Look at me.
yeah.
And I came back from this walk or run and I said, I'm going to quit. And he said, You're going to quit? I said, Yes. And he said, All right, if you're going to quit, call this woman and she's going to help you. And she
Wow.
was sober and she had three kids as well. She was
Yeah,
married, happily married. She still is. And she
yeah,
was living this life in going to these meetings. And I called her and I met her at a meeting. And she was like, All right, you're going to go do this. You're going to go do that. And I do not follow rules. I'm like, rules are made to be
yeah,
broken. What? But I
yeah,
did it. And again, that feeling that you talked about, the cells, I was like, I'm going to do whatever this woman tells me to do
yeah,
because I
yeah.
don't want to go back to what it
Mhm,
was like.
mhm, mhm.
So
That's
I
incredible.
isn't it crazy? So for 1 year,
Yeah.
I literally went to meeting after meeting, day after day after day. And I mean, people thought I had moved. They're like, Where have you been? Did you move
Yeah.
to a different state? I'm like, No, I've just been, because a lot of them, are in church basements.
Yeah,
So I'm
yeah,
just like,
yeah.
I'm hanging out in a church. And it gave me the foundation to be able to weather anything. Cause now,
Mhm.
I've gone through, my mom's died, I've gone through COVID, three of my best friends have died. I've
Oh,
dealt with lots of stuff. My
yeah.
oldest son, I've had stuff with him and his now wife. So there's been lots of stuff that's come up that you would think, oh my God, I'm going to get a dirty martini, forget it.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And I have these tools that I'm like, that will never be the answer.
So
These,
how long are you 17 years sober, Elizabeth?
yes.
Amazing. That's absolutely incredible. And do you still do meetings and stuff? What's your relationship with AA like now?
It's been weird. It's such a great question. So since COVID, I have not, about a month ago, I stopped going to meetings. I went to one actually like 2 weeks ago, but I
Yeah,
do not go regularly anymore. I'm really more into my spiritual stuff and the meditation aspect of it.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I really am, I'm like doing this Halo app because it's Lent, and that's been kind of amazing. I don't go to
yeah,
church, a physical church all the time, but I'm very spiritual. I go to a
yeah,
yoga studio a lot. And it's just about getting zen with my feelings. It's all about
yeah,
dealing with my feelings. And
yeah,
this brings us to this, you have ADD, and I love that you're so transparent about it. And my oldest son has ADHD.
yeah.
And I will tell you, so he was diagnosed when he was little, like 2.5. He was in
Wow.
nursery school. And the nurseries, and which I think is so crazy that teachers expect kids to sit and listen to a story for, like, especially a
Insane.
boy,
Yeah,
especially a boy, right?
absolutely insane. Yeah,
Insane.
yeah.
So this nursery school teacher says to me, I think he has a brain tumor. I said, really? You think he has a brain tumor? And I said,
Oh
why do
my
you think he has
God.
a brain tumor? And she said, well, he won't sit in this square and listen to this story. And I looked at the teacher and I said, I don't think you could pay me enough money to sit in a square and listen to you for 30 minutes as well. So do I have a brain tumor too?
Oh my
Now,
God. That's
because
horrific.
because of the addiction in my family, as I've
Mhm.
talked about, because it's all addiction, let's face it, we all have addictions. And I was so petrified that he was going to become addicted because I knew that Adderall and all of that, like if you give a kid like drugs from a small age, they're going to
Mhm.
always think that you have to go to a drug to make you better.
Mhm.
So I didn't medicate him. And instead, I got him out on the sports fields. And
Mhm.
that became my mission. Like, I literally, he played every sport, and he might not have been the best, but he was there every day. He
Yeah.
played football, he wrestled, he played lacrosse. It was all about getting into action. And I would have to go to teachers, and they'd give me reports about him and say, he's not doing this right, he's not doing that right. I mean, I'd be sitting there in tears. Then
Mhm.
I'd curse at the teachers. I'd have all these teachers, and I'd be like, F you know what? This is my son. And I'd be like, how can you talk about my baby like this? And I'd be like, I dare you to say something nice about him. And his journey, I didn't, again, he didn't ask until he got into high school, which is about, when he was about 15, did he ask to say he had friends that did very well academically, which he did not.
Yeah.
Ended up going to an amazing university. He got his degree. He has a great job.
Oh, I love
I mean,
that.
went on to do all these things. It was not an easy journey. But when at one point, he did say, he said, Mom, I want to try something. His best friend went to Princeton. So, like, almost had a perfect score on the
Yeah.
SATs. Like, I want to be as smart as him. And I said, all right, I'll let you go on medication. But you have to be able to communicate with me how you're feeling when you
Mhm.
go on this. And he went on it for one day. And the teacher at school, and he had gone to a public school, reached out to me and said, he seems really depressed. He's writing on his notebook, I hate Kent. And he called me and he's like, Mom, I'm having these thoughts. And I've never
Mhm.
had these thoughts of, like wanting to hurt himself. And I
Oh my
said,
God.
we're done. I said, we're done. I
Yeah.
don't care if you get straight F's in school. I
Yeah,
don't care
yeah,
if
yeah.
you feel everything. It's all about your self-love and you getting to this place. And so that was my journey with him. But it's hard, It's hard when society says you're supposed to look like this.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you about the education system I mean, it sounds very similar to the situation in the UK, where the entire thing is just trying to sort of hammer square pegs into round poles. And the entire education system is kind of geared away from kind of expression and creativity and, opinions. And obviously ADHD is especially ADHD boys cannot sit still in classrooms and listen to like long sort of nor could we, as you rightly point out. It's absolute bollocks. So I totally agree with you on that. Like my son is, and the sports thing is huge, like for all ADHDers, if you can just, but movement of body and cardiovascular exercise is probably the number one thing that you can do to kind of help your way through the diagnosis. Have you had your diagnosis yet, then, Elizabeth? Where are you at in your journey?
So for me personally, I took one of those tests and online and it said I definitely had ADD. I felt like for a long time. Now again, I was born in 1968. So I'm 55.
You're
And
looking great.
oh my gosh, thank you so much. See,
That's
this is what a
amazing.
sober life does.
I
Um
can see that.
but it's so funny because when again growing up in my era, nobody said you had ADHD. It was just like, oh, you're really hyper and you have a
Yeah.
dunce camp on.
Especially women, diagnoses in girls did not even exist
Not
until
nothing.
very recently. Yeah.
Exactly. So I always thought it's my I can do 10 million things at once. I can
Yeah.
be over here. Now I'm going to be cleaning out the dishwasher, doing a load of laundry,
Yeah.
making dinner, making sure homework's done, feeding the dog, like all these things at the same time. And I'm like, oh my God, look at me. I'm amazing.
Yeah.
But it has been through the journey that I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, here I am. I've been sober for this whole time. And I notice. Like,
Yeah.
I can't clean out the dishwasher and just clean out the dishwasher. I
Yes, I
have
relate.
I can't I'll give you another example. So talk about changing your names on social media, on having a different name on Instagram. I have well, I hire Caroline, who helps me, is like my savior. She's like amazing, amazing. She was like sent to me from God, I swear to God, because I started working with her and she's like, "How many Instagram accounts do you have?" And I'm like, mm, like 7. And then how many URLs do you own? Because every time I get a great idea, I go on to GoDaddy and I buy
Yeah.
another URL and another URL. And I've started to realize like all these little superpowers that I have, if I maybe honed them in, I might I might be good at one thing for 1 minute, but it's hard. It's a lot of work.
It's hard. It's a lot of work, but you are clearly good at a lot of things, and you are like harnessing your superpowers. You obviously you're an amazing people person and connector and personality and podcast host, so it is working for you. But it's just as you described, it is exhausting living in an ADHD brain. It is so exhausting. Like whereas I imagine for neurotypical people there'll be a few sort of like little windows open on the computer browser of their brain and they can deal with one at a time. But for you and I, there's like 50 tabs open at all times. And you're diving from like one to the other, to the other, to the next, to the other, and trying to, I mean, our greatest superpower is obviously our ability to hyper focus. But my God, that is hard to harness at the right time. Like I can hyper focus on the most random shit. Sorry, am I allowed to swear on
Yes,
this
of
podcast?
course.
I
Of course.
apologize. I've
Of course. I say
strength
I
in there.
always curse. It's part of my
That
thing. It's okay.
that makes me feel better. I will find myself like Googling, something that happened on holiday 4 years ago, something I might meet in a restaurant when I'm trying to do a tax return or I'm trying to, if only we could control those kind of parts of our brains that take over. And I think that's the real ADHD superpower because obviously there are so many like high achieving sort of entrepreneurs, sports personalities, entertainers with ADHD. It's trying to harness it in the right direction, which I think you're doing tremendously well. It's only you that knows how many windows you've got open on the browser of your brain.
But it's really also it's hard to relax.
Yes, yes, that's the nub. Yes.
And it's hard to turn it off, right? It's
Yeah,
hard to turn it
yeah.
off. And
Impossible.
it really is. And the self-judgment and the negativity that comes in, right?
Yeah,
And alcohol for me was perfect because I didn't have any feelings, right? I
yeah,
loved it because I didn't have any feelings. I didn't have to go, "Oh my gosh, you're a loser. You can't keep up like other people. Look at you. You're like you're spaz. Like I'm always a spaz. I'm loud. Everybody knows when I walk into a room. It's like I've got this big personality and all this
yeah,
stuff that's following me
yeah.
and being okay with that. And a lot of it has come with age.
Right. Interesting.
The older I get, the less I care. For a long time, you worry about what everybody, like, especially with kids your age. Like, I remember when my kids were your kids' age, and you go to these things and people show up and they look all put together. And
Yeah,
I'd be
yeah,
like, I mean, I remember telling people, like, I had 3 little ones. I was divorced. I had, like, my ex husband, was drinking down the street, was a total train wreck. I mean, I was
yeah.
living this life that was crazy. And I just be like, well, at least he has a diaper on.
Yeah. Oh my God, Elizabeth, I could not relate more. I took my kid to school once with one shoe on, because we'd driven there. And by the time I bundled all three of them in the car, he'd got into the car with one shoe. And do you know what I did? I just dropped him anyway. I'm just like, I'm not taking him home. I would rather go through the shame of dropping him off in one shoe than have to take him back. And this is the ADHD kid. And I think self acceptance. And I love to hear you say that it grows with age, and especially for us ADHDers, because when you're sort of describing how you felt about yourself, like everyone knows when you walk into the room and you're loud and you're outgoing, the thing you've got to remember is the rest of the room are no doubt looking at you thinking, here she comes, the life and soul, isn't she amazing? But your self narrative is completely polar opposite to how other people are seeing you. And actually, people love the train wreck mums like us. I mean, because we're just keeping it real. We're doing it. We'll send them in with one shoe on. I think, thank God, although I do concede, I think a few years ago it was different. There's a counterculture now that goes against the grain of, like the perfect Instagram mum. And here I am with my 6 kids all wearing matching bone clothes. And I think there is now, thank God, like a massive counterculture that says if we can just keep them alive until 7 p.m., we have done a good job. We've fed them, we've watered them, we've kept them safe from harm. Sometimes that's as good as it's going to get. And look at your kids now. Like, so your eldest, did you say what age are your kids now? So you mentioned your
So
oldest was going
now
through.
they're 27, 26, and 24. And
God.
it's crazy because I felt like what you just described. For one, my son, the oldest one with because he played all these sports, every day he would forget one cleat. Mom, I
Yeah.
forgot a cleat. I mean, I knew the people at the school so well because I was there like every day dropping something
Yeah.
off. And it's very interesting because when he graduated from high school, I felt like this whole sense of like, oh my gosh, we did it. He did it
Yes.
because the drugs and alcohol, get introduced into kids at
Yeah.
that teenage years. And it was really the fact that I was sober
Yeah.
was so like I didn't have to be like a hypocrite, right? You know how many moms are like, don't drink, but they're over there drinking. Don't smoke weed. Mommy's doing weed. Mommy's
Yeah.
eating edibles. Mommy's doing.
Yeah.
I was sober as a church mouse.
Yeah.
So I was like, you know what? Bring it on. Like, we're sober here. I know what you're
Yeah.
doing. And I knew all the time. And I could say to them, "Dad, don't do this." And they all
Yeah.
tried and they all partaked in whatever they did. And
Yeah.
they would drink. And they'd have parties at my house all the time when I went out for dinner. Literally, I'd go out for dinner and they'd have a party. So they
Yeah.
were just like me. But we had real conversations about
That's so good. Yeah.
it was all about the honesty all the time.
Yeah.
And all the kids in my town, because I've been transparent like you are, everybody knew I was sober. Like
Yeah.
I started wearing it like a scarlet letter, right? I was like,
Yeah.
I'm busy living sober. I am out there. Do you want to come talk about alcoholism? Nobody wanted to come. But everybody knew. And then all the kids, when my youngest graduated, wore t-shirts because I had these t-shirts made, busy living sober. And they would like all these boys, be it all of my youngest son's friends, would all be together and they'd be like, busy. Now they'd all be half in the bag already. They'd all be drinking, but they would at least know, like,
Yeah.
wow, this is something we're talking about now. This is like, if
Yeah.
we've
Yeah.
got a problem, we need to talk to somebody about it instead of it
Yeah.
being, shh, don't tell anybody. This
Which
is
is
embarrassing.
exactly right, because that's how it was back in the day, wasn't it? It was absolutely a dirty secret to be kept away, and you go and hide over there, and you take your sort of problems over there and keep them out of the regular space. But I totally agree with you, and I think I look at my nieces and nephews now, who are similar age to your kids, and I feel like there's a real new movement now of, because back in the day, if you didn't drink or you didn't partake, you were a square, you were a nerd, you were no fun. Whereas I think now, thank God, it's becoming much more acceptable and even kind of on vogue for younger people to be sober without judgment. And you don't need to have a problem. You're just doing it for your mental health, your physical health. And thank God those tides are turning, because it has been a long time that big alcohol has kind of ruled the message of kind of like, you drink to go out to a party, you drink to commiserate, you drink to relax, you drink to pep yourself up, bring yourself down. And, I do feel like the tides are turning, thank God. It's a
Uh,
different world.
Oh, it's a totally different world. And I want to ask, so I want to go back to a couple things. For one, what did your husband say when you decided to quit? How did your marriage, like, were you guys party partners or what
Well,
happened?
interestingly, we weren't party partners. I was always the kind, much like yourself, I was always the kind of give me a wooden spoon and a kitchen tabletop, and I'm up there and I'll blast out Dolly Parton Islands in the Stream. He'd never give me the Kenny Rogers part, sadly, so I had to take both parts. But that really was kind of the story of my life. And I remember when we moved we used to live like in London, and then we moved out to the suburbs. Like when we had kids, you just want more space, and I remember when we moved out to the suburbs where I live now in like in a leafy suburb of London. And we moved into this road where all of a sudden everything just felt different. And I thought, oh God, I'm not changing myself and who I am to match. And the first time we went to a neighbour's party in this kind of leafy suburb, I got absolutely hammered. And I look back on this with pure shame. And I remember kind of all these kind of like lovely middle class sort of ladies in there, like fleeces, and I remember trying to drag one of them up on a kitchen counter. I was standing on this woman's kitchen counter, wooden spoon in hand. I was getting the music to be blasted out. And I just remember looking back on that the next day and thinking, in the moment, I thought, look at me, I'm the fun one, I'm getting everyone going. Nobody wanted to get going. They just wanted to talk about their geraniums and like the jam that they'd made the night before. And I'm kind of dragging them all up. So I was always the driver in the sort of socializing too much, too far, not knowing when to leave. He has always been a totally moderate drinker and a sort of someone who's always managed to find the middle line in life. He doesn't drink too much, he doesn't eat too much, he exercises in a normal amount, he talks quite slow. Oh, you know how hard that is for us ADHDs, slow talkers. And I've always sort of gone at a billion miles an hour and like, party, like, I think, go hard or go home. So when I sort of stopped drinking, he was incredibly supportive, but also I obviously did quite a magnificent job of hiding how bad things had become. Because you know what we're us like problematic drinkers are so good at covering our bases and keeping our secret. And we did like, the FBI should recruit from like problematic drinkers because we are really good with our stealth living. So when I sort of said I'm never going to drink again, he gave that, which we now know is not the greatest reaction because he didn't realize how bad the problem was. And he was like, well, maybe you could just moderate and just have like totally innocently, it's not like he needed me to drink. I'm far easier to cope with when I'm not drinking. But as I went on into sobriety, I kind of opened up a little bit more about how bad things have got. I was hiding the bottles. I was drinking alone all the time. I, was drinking as soon as I got back from the school run. It had crept up to such a massive extent. And thank God he was incredibly supportive. And in the early days of sobriety, I did say to him, please don't drink around me because I find it really hard. Now, he drinks around me, not all the time because he's not a big drinker, but when we go on holiday, he'll always have a glass of wine with a meal. And now it's like an anthropological study. I feel like David Attenborough, like watching a gorilla in the wild, because I'll be like, how in the name of all that's holy do you leave something in your glass of wine and walk away? And I'll even, at lunch, you might have one beer. Who has one beer? Why would you just have one beer? And sometimes I say to him, what's the point? Why do you even bother with one beer? You don't get a buzz off it. You don't get, and it's really brought home to me, like, how completely alien, like, his relationship with drinking versus my relationship with drinking. Because now I just look upon it as a sort of fascination of, I could not be with someone who drank problematically, though. That's a totally different thing. I don't want to be around drunk people, but I'm absolutely fine being around people who are drinking because that's them and that's their life and that's fine. But I'm very, very happy where I am, and I'm never sort of going to be that. How is it for you being around sort of drinkers and that sort of thing?
Oh my gosh, today I'm the same exact like I go to bars. I mean, I have alcohol in my house now because my
Yeah.
kids again, they haven't gotten to that place and I always say they're not a pickle yet because once you're a pickle, you can't be a cucumber
I
again.
love that expression. Yeah, is
You know,
that an AA expression? I love it's so
it's just
it says it
I
all.
think it is. And so
Yeah.
it ended up that so I have it in my and I could it has no I have no interest. I look at it like it's
Yeah.
poison, back in the day they used
Same.
to put the skull and
Same.
crossbones.
Yeah.
I have no interest. But I don't like being around people that drink too much. And I
Yeah.
feel like society today, so many people are talking about how alcohol, we don't need it anymore. Like Jordan Peterson, do you know who that is? A
Yeah.
psychiatrist.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so Jordan Peterson just came out and he said, if the only thing you're going to quit in 2024 is alcohol, that's the only thing you should do because it is so bad for you. And then another guy from Stanford said the same thing. And it's kind of interesting because, as you pointed out earlier, it's like these younger people right now are seeing how bad it is for us,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
poison, it's killing us. And during COVID, what they did with locking us up in our homes like a bunch of caged animals. And you couldn't go out and meet your friends in a playground or at a church or a synagogue or mosque, wherever it is you like to worship. And
Mhm.
you couldn't even go there, but you could go and order liquor to be delivered to your home.
Yeah, that was insane. We had a similar thing here where all of the shops were closed, apart from shops that were deemed like emergency or vital to human life, which were pharmacies, supermarkets, and off licenses. And it's like, what the actual? I mean, the message that that sends to people, and then obviously the rates of domestic violence, and the whole of the horrors that belie alcohol, like all of the suicides, all of those sort of awful traits in our society are almost 90% fueled by alcohol. I mean, I'm not saying if you got rid of alcohol completely, those things would never happen, but my God, they are a contributing factor.
Oh my gosh, 100%. I mean, they say that 90% of people that are in prison are due to drugs and alcohol.
Yeah,
And it's so
yeah,
interesting because right now the pharmaceutical companies are, they're making more and more and more on the bottom line, and more people are dying. Isn't that weird? More money for the pharmaceutical companies and alcohol companies, and kids are dying at a rate that's insane because
yeah.
of the fentanyl that's coming over on,
Oh
especially on the
God.
border here in the US. I mean, one woman wrote to me and she said, "Do you know that this one woman, or I don't even know if it was a man or a woman, but a person bummed a cigarette from someone, and the cigarette was laced with fentanyl."
Jesus Christ, God. I mean, thank God that side of things hasn't hit our shores yet. The fentanyl, well, not that it is in like common parlance, but yeah, I mean, that's just terrifying, absolutely terrifying. But the link that you just mentioned there about prisoners, I was reading a really interesting statistic recently as well about ADHD and the prison population. And what was really fascinating when I started learning about ADHD and kind of going on my own ADHD journey is that like one of the primary characteristics of ADHD is actually a dopamine deficiency. So anything that we can do as ADHD is to kind of bump up that dopamine, be it drinking, alcohol, binge eating, shopping. Obviously, on the much healthier side, exercise, like really hardcore cardiovascular exercise, just anything that can kind of pump up those brain chemicals naturally. But is that something that you've sort of noticed in yourself in terms of like, so obviously drinking would give you this big flood of like artificial dopamine, for want of a better word, artificially manufactured dopamine. How did you sort of supplement that in the early days of stopping drinking?
Oh my gosh, what a great question. So, when I first quit, I used to go to Baskin Robbins every day, which is an ice cream store. So I
Yeah,
had
yeah, I
ice
know.
cream,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
ice cream, ice cream. I mean, now, oh my God, I wouldn't even eat a Baskin Robbins because I don't even know what's in the ice cream. But anyway, back then, because now I care about everything I eat, right? Now I have to
Yeah,
read
yeah,
every
yeah.
label when I'm in the store.
Yeah, yeah, good
But
for
back
you.
then, I did that. I smoked cigarettes. I did that for a long time,
Yeah.
right? I did that. And now today, I try and meditate like I go to yoga as much as I can. I
Well, talk to me
meditate.
about that. How do you, because this is, I am at the very beginning of my kind of meditation journey. I've done yoga for quite a while, but as you described, I find it still, with all of this knowledge, impossible to quieten my mind. If you have any tips for an ADHD on
And
how
then
do you do that?
and I want to ask you in a second. I'm going to come back and I want to ask you what you did. But all right, so for me, so one of these steps that they talk about in the 12 steps in AA
Mhm.
is prayer and meditation. And they said, "Oh, you have to meditate." And I'd be like, "What the hell are you talking about meditate? I can't freaking sit there and meditate and go, and I'm not going to
Yeah,
think about the laundry, the dog, the car,
yeah.
what is the gardener
Yeah,
coming? Is
you've
the
got
gardener?"
those 50 browsers open in your brain and they're all going at the same time. So, well, how do you do it? Because it
So,
sounds like
well,
hell.
guess what? I ended up going and I took, so of course, now I don't know if it seems like you could be a little bit like this too. So I always am trying to better myself. So I'm
Yeah,
always taking a course, right? Like I'm
yeah,
always trying, okay, I'm going to learn how to do this. I'm going to learn how to do
yeah.
that. And I'm an entrepreneur. I've never really worked for anybody because I can't, because I always have to do, I'm like, I get bored and I have to go do something else. So I ended up going and taking a course on meditation at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. So
Yeah.
I take this course and I went and the first thing the teacher said was, your brain will always have thoughts. I
Nice.
said,
Yeah.
what? They're like, yeah, your brain will, the only time your brain will ever go dead silent pretty much is when you're dead. And I'm like, oh my gosh, so I'm normal. And
Yeah,
it
that's
was,
good. Yeah.
and then it was learning to, instead of when the thought comes, when you're meditating and getting quiet,
Yeah. Yeah.
not attaching myself to it, right? And going down the total toilet bowl because a lot of
Yeah.
times it was
So you're
dark.
kind of observing your thoughts rather than
Right.
trying to eradicate your thoughts. You're kind of observing your thoughts float past.
Right. Like, I'm not going to solve world peace today. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not going to have my kids aren't going to get perfect, whatever it was. Right. So it's like a cloud in the sky because how many clouds go by? That's how my thoughts are. They go
Yeah.
by, they go by, they go by. And at certain times of my life, it's especially if my ADD is
Yeah.
crazy. If
Yeah.
I'm eating sugar, I can't eat a lot of sugar, right? Anymore. I have to go on a walk. I have to do certain things in my little repertoire to make
Yeah.
sure that my brain, I'm not constantly phonetic. And,
Yeah.
and fear was such a huge proponent of, like, I always was scared, right? I'm scared this is going to happen or that could happen and this could happen and that could happen and that could happen and that could happen. And when COVID happened, they're telling us we could die of this thing that none of us can see, none of us can touch, none of us can feel, right? We can't really see, you've got this, oh, all right, this thing's floating around that we're all going to die from, right? But we can't see it. Well, I already have a disease that, if I pick up a drink, I don't know where I'm going to go, right? I don't know if I have one drink because I don't stop, right? I am on, like you said, go big or go home. I mean, I would have one, I'd have 47. So I already have this disease that could kill me at any time. And you're going to tell me that I have this other thing that now is floating in the air that I could get and I could, okay, I can't be scared anymore. Like, what is the worst thing that's going to happen?
Mhm, mhm. Do you know
Like,
what? It's so interesting you say that because I remember um, reading a comment from an ADHD saying that actually COVID was quite a good time for ADHDers because we are so primed for threat and kind of looming. We're so good at crises, really, because our entire lives are kind of like hypervigilance and just waiting for the next thing to happen. And actually, what's interesting is when crises do hit our lives, it's ADHDers that are probably the best people to have in the front line. I did a post on this just recently, and one of the people who replied was, and the post was about how ADHDers are great in a crisis. Don't ask your ADHD friend to meet you at 4 p.m. a week on
yeah,
Wednesday.
yeah, I
But
saw that.
if you sort of need them to be there at 3 a.m. in some sort of critical emergency, they're the first ones that you want to call. And one of the people who replied was an A&E nurse who was kind of like working on the front line and said, I do this job, I have ADHD, and it's all my kind of skill sets utilized because it's dealing with a crisis, making fast decisions, risk taking, because you have to take risks. You don't have time to think, let me think about this one now. You just have to instantly be on the move and sort of making decisions. So I can totally understand how when that kind of cold crisis hit, in some ways we go into a calmer state.
Exactly, exactly. And I was just thinking when you were talking about how, you know, ADD for so long had this negative connotation. And if you're just
Yeah,
listening to this and not watching it on YouTube, please subscribe to my channel, by the way. I'm doing air quotes. It was a bad thing. Like, oh, you have ADHD. Oh my
yeah,
gosh. Like, it's a
yeah,
negative thing. And instead of, again, looking at like it's your superpower. It's my
yeah,
superpower. And I'm able to accept, like, once we're able to accept who we are, like, I am many things, right? Like, I don't fit in a box. And I think
yeah,
that once our society has said, okay, we aren't at a doctor's office as we walk through our lives, right? When you have to go fill out those forms, what are you? And I'm like, if I could check what I am, I mean, it would go on and on and on and on and on, right? And being able to accept the fact that I'm not just one thing, everybody. I'm
yeah.
many things. And
Yes,
right.
exactly.
And, I'm not going to go and fill myself with pharmaceuticals or with other painkillers because that's what they all are, right? That's what pharmaceuticals are. I understand if you need to take medication, a doctor prescribes it to you. I'm not a doctor, so I understand if you get a doctor's note and it's important to you, take the pharmaceuticals. But drinking to extremes and picking up drugs to extremes to self medicate, which
Yeah,
is what
yeah,
I did,
same.
which is
Yeah,
what I did,
yeah,
was not something that I recommend to people. And they are painkillers, you know, and they're legalized painkillers.
Well, I totally agree with you. Alcohol, you know, the connection now between ADHD and alcohol is completely asserted by science and everyone else, because we are trying to replace the dopamine deficit, and alcohol will give you that momentarily, as will other drugs, be them legal or illegal. But alcohol is just the worst thing that you can do with ADHD. I don't think there is any single substance you could put in your body to make things worse, because of course everything that you're trying to numb, that part of your brain that is, I mean, sure, it will numb it in the moment, but my God, are you setting yourself up for hell on earth? Because when you wake up, usually at 3 a.m., and the entire world's problems start racing through your head like on horseback, just like the apocalypse coming straight for you. It is absolutely, I mean, it's crushing. I remember just kind of lying in a fetal position for like 10, 12 hours, just thinking. I remember literally sort of fantasizing about a meteorite hitting the earth and just thinking, God, wouldn't it be great if just like everything just
Yeah.
stopped and obliterated? I mean, I'm literally dreaming about the end of the world on a Saturday morning while the birds are tweeting outside my window. And that is where alcohol will take you. And it's like, I have so much respect for the fact that you know, 17 years ago, way before the explosion in the understanding of ADHD, because it didn't even exist for girls back then. It was insane that you sort of found the tools to get to where you are now. And all sort of, you know, back then you were literally just kind of like looking through the forest, because nothing came easy. Like, you didn't have social media, you didn't, you know, the internet wasn't kind of a big fluffy friendly place. Not that the internet is always a big fluffy friendly place, but once you find your tribe, you know, it can do great things. But I think it's amazing that you sort of found your way to that community by yourself. I can't imagine how hard that must have been.
It's so funny because I'm a searcher, right? I feel
Yeah.
like I have a dear friend who's also an astrologer, and she's almost 90. And she said, I said, "Do you think it's crazy that I'm constantly searching?" And she said, "That's what we're supposed to be doing as human beings.
Oh, I love
It's
that. Yeah,
constantly searching." So
yeah.
we know that I use the 12 steps. What did you use to get sober? How have you done, how have you gotten 4 years, and what do you attribute it to? I mean, are you spiritual? What do you do?
I am now. I wasn't then, but I am now. I also, having listened to your podcast, I know you were also brought up Catholic. Us ADHD Catholics, there's a bond there. But so no, I wasn't really obviously brought up Catholic, but I was not at all religious or spiritual when I started my sober journey. But it is absolutely incredible what kind of rises within. So I mentioned that kind of moment of almost like a primeval understanding that I had to stop drinking. And that really did come from just a certain knowledge that if I carried on, I was going to die slowly, quickly. It didn't really matter. But I knew that I was only going down one path. There was only one way it was going. When I made that decision, I really, my entire life had revolved around alcohol, either drinking it, wondering where my next drink was coming from, hiding what had happened the night before, driving out recyclings at 3 a.m. so no one would see, shoving, you know, chewing gum in my mouth so no one would, you know, that everything was about alcohol. So when alcohol was taken out, there's this huge, like, what the hell? What do I even think about? All of my brain space is suddenly available. And first of all, there's all of the kind of like feelings that you have to feel, which is just terrible. It's like, my God, I don't want to feel everything. That's the last thing I want. So I tried, but obviously you have to walk through those feelings. There is no other way. I think that's why a lot of people stumble in early sobriety, because they think, Jesus, is this what life is going to be like? Is this how I'm going to feel? And it's not how you're going to feel. It's how you're going to feel before you get over the hump. But you've just got to sit through that pain and face the feelings. What I did during that period was I treated sobriety like an exam, like I was studying for something. I thought I have to know everything. And I obviously, with the ADHD, it's very hard to sit through and read through long books. I downloaded Audible. I looked for every quick lit book that had been sort of highly recommended. So I had it in my ear all the time. I did podcasts. I didn't know of yours back then, Elizabeth, but that would definitely be one of my bedfellows now. If I was going out, I'd have a podcast in my ear the whole time. I had Quitlit, TED Talks. Literally, I studied it like I was doing a degree in sobriety. And then about a month in, I joined an online group, not, it was all online, just kind of like groups of women supporting each other through sobriety, all at similar stages. I think community is so important, whether it's AA or whether it's, any kind of online group. And then I started an Instagram account, I think about maybe a month into sobriety. And I really just started by saying, I'm 4 weeks sober. And then as I got a little bit braver, then I started to show my face. Then I started to tell a little bit more about my story. And it just felt so, I think that feeling of connectivity to other people, because what had been such a dark, shameful secret in my life for so long was suddenly like, oh my God, there are so many people, and especially women like me, who are in the same position, like mothers and working mothers, and just people who are just finding life really freaking hard and were sort of self medicating and feeling all this shame. And I honestly think that the biggest tip I could give anyone who is sober curious is you have to fill the space that opens up with all that good stuff. And there is so, like, you make new friends, new activities, your mind opens, like what we both sort of talked about, like a rising sort of spirituality. And that can sound a bit woo-woo and daunting to people, but actually it's incredibly comforting. And you mentioned before about losing your mum, and I'm so sorry to hear that. I lost my mum too not long ago,
I'm
and
so
I
sorry.
honestly do not think, with that, thank you, but I'd lost my dad many, many years ago when I was in sort of very actively drinking. And the difference between grieving someone that you love as a sober person versus is, oh my God. And I did a sort of a bit of a sort of post about it a while ago, where I'm feeling connections with like little robins that are landing outside the window. And I noticed the world in a way that I never even noticed birds. The only times I noticed birds was when they were tweeting in my ear when I was in a fetal position, dreaming of death. But now I've got bird feeders all over the gardens, and I kind of just feel this connection with life through sobriety that I never ever felt before. And it really is, like, I know it sounds a little bit woo-woo and far-fetched, but it really is like a whole new world. And once you get to the other side of that initial hump, it's life is just completely different.
It is. I mean, I am the same exact way. We are like, I swear to gosh, we're like kindred spirits. Like, I live here in Florida, so there's so many birds all the time. And for so long, I missed so much. I was 37
Yes.
when I got sober. So I was
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, now I'm finally seeing a robin. I'm finally seeing, I mean, here we have spoonbills, which are pink birds that fly in the sky. I mean, it's just amazing. But for so long, and when, somebody passes, and I think that, as humans, we don't really talk about death in a way
No,
that
we
is,
don't.
we don't. And it's totally natural. We're all going to
Yeah.
die, right?
Yes.
And we all are going to die. I say that to people all the time. And like, I see my best friend was murdered. And the day she was murdered, I was living in Philadelphia. It was December, and there was a ladybug. Now it's cold there. It's like 20 degrees, right? 30
Yeah.
degrees, whatever that is in Celsius. I don't even know, but I could look it up. But there was a ladybug, and I was like in my shower, and they're not supposed to be ladybugs that time of year.
Oh my
I'm like,
God.
oh my gosh. And so yesterday I saw a ladybug. I saw a hummingbird 2 days ago come into my beautiful hibiscus, my bright red hibiscus flowers. And I knew it was a friend coming to visit me,
Oh, I love
and it
that.
just
Yeah.
gives me peace as
Yeah.
walking around here. And for so long, it was like I didn't want to feel those feelings of, yes, I miss that person.
Yeah, yeah,
And
I totally hear you. Yeah, I totally hear you, and I think it's just a connection with that energy, life force that's all around us. And obviously, the thing that we got from alcohol was kind of numbing that chatter and frontal cortex, but the cost at which we numbed that, because we numbed everything. We numbed our sort of connection to the world around us, to nature, to feelings, and our intuition. Like, and I'm so sorry to hear about your friend. My God, that just sounds
it
awful.
was terrible. It
But
was terrible.
how long ago was
Almost
that?
11 years ago.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
still, you just hold it with you
Well, I
forever, of
know,
course.
but she was like bigger than life. And so, I know that she's always around, right? I can't
Yeah,
touch her. It's just like this whole thing, these diseases and everything else. Like, I know that the people that are gone might be physically gone. We can't hear
yeah,
them anymore. We can't see them. Maybe sometimes if we're really feeling really in tune, you will. I know there are people that do see things, right, and hear things.
yeah,
I don't want to poo-poo that for anyone. So
yeah,
I know she's around, right?
yeah,
I know
yeah,
she's around, and I can't think of it in such a sad, like, she's in a beautiful spot. And for
yeah,
me, I believe in heaven, as crazy as our, growing up with all the like doomsday that Catholicism was, it's
yeah.
like you're gonna go to hell. I'm like, oh my God, I'm definitely going to hell. I mean, I always thought that since I was a little kid. But
Me too.
and you're seeing Jesus on the cross up there with the thorns in his head and blood, and you're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like,
Didn't look like a great way to end, did it? No,
oh my
I
God. It
hear
was
you.
like, oh, it was horrible, right? And so
Yeah,
scary as a child. But
yeah,
the part that they talked about, which I always took away from it, especially like at Easter, was like, oh my gosh, it's beautiful, right? The
yeah,
light comes. It's
yeah,
beautiful. It's
yeah,
amazing. So I have to believe that. And on
yeah,
this journey of sobriety, like, it just keeps the light keeps shining.
yeah.
I
I love that.
really
Yeah.
I feel like when I was drinking, when you go into an old church, right? And there are a
Mhm.
lot of old churches around with the stained glass windows, right?
Yes.
And in an
Yeah.
old one, they're really filled with dirt, right? They're filled with dirt and soot because no one's gotten up there to scrub them, right?
Mhm.
That was my soul when I was drinking. But
Oh,
once you clean it off. Once I cleaned it off and I could, as you said, you take that year, it's that first year and just realize I'm going to have a lot of shame. I'm going to
yeah,
have a lot of sadness. I'm going to have a
yeah.
lot of remorse. I'm going to have,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, I wish I'd done this differently. I wish I'd done this differently. And accepting that that's where your life was. Like
Yeah,
that's what I got from like doing the 12 steps was this ability to be like, you walk through something that's kind of like confession in the middle steps in 4, 5, and 6 and
yeah, yeah.
and then you give it to God and it's like, oh my gosh, once I get to that place that I get to accept that that was my past,
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
it doesn't define who I am today.
Absolutely not. And it
I
sounds
get
like
to
it does
shine
sound like such a yeah, it sounds like such a valuable process, like the 12-step program. And obviously, God, it's just like the amount of people it has helped and the amount of people that is kind of brought through the system. I'm fascinated by it. Obviously, it's a different journey to mine, but I just think and whatever, and it sounds like we're both at a similar place, really, doesn't it? I think sobriety does open up these like huge parts inside ourselves that alcohol had kept kind of hidden for so long. And it kind of shrinks your world, really, doesn't it? By the end, I just didn't want to go out. I didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want to, it wasn't about socializing or fun. It was the opposite to all of the things that it promised in the early days of drinking. Because obviously it was fun at one time, right? We wouldn't have done it for so long. But my God, when it starts to take you down, it really takes you low.
Oh, and we're so lucky because there's so many who don't get off that bus.
Yeah, yeah. It is.
And
It is.
so
You're so right. We are so lucky, and I do feel that gratitude every day.
and what you do, thank you for everything you do on
Oh,
Instagram
so
because
welcome.
it's brought about, there's when I got the 12, oh my gosh, 15, 16 years ago, maybe I went and I patented sober, not ashamed
Oh, I
because
love
I
that. Yeah,
didn't, because we have so much shame when we're getting
yeah,
sober and
yeah.
we
We do.
don't need to own it. We get to be free today and it doesn't matter what we did yesterday. And to be able to be free and vulnerable and put yourself out there, I thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. Honestly, it's been such a pleasure. And just to say, Elizabeth, I mean, you are such a personality and an amazing podcaster. So, no, it's been so lovely to chat to you and connect with you.
It's been amazing. I definitely want to. You were talking about a book I want to read. What was it called? The ADHD, the farmer, and what was it?
Well, the book that I've just read, it's a long one, but it's very good. Hunter in a Farmer's World. And yeah, it's sort of a evolutionary discussion about why we've got the ADHD gene in our gene pool. And it basically says that it goes back to hunter-gatherer societies and that the ADHD gene was that of the hunters. So it's kind of like what we now describe as distractibility was actually kind of hypervigilance, like looking for threats and movements and risk taking, and of course, like dopamine fueled environments. And it's a brilliant explanation if you've got a 10-year-old kid with ADHD, because he absolutely loves it. And I'm like, look, you're not malfunctioned, you're not defective, you're a hunter. It's not, you're not the problem. The education system is.
Oh
But
yeah,
that's a tale for another time.
it totally is, because I think they need to have like a place where boys can go learn, where they're standing up the entire time, being able
Yes,
to run around
yes.
all the time.
Climbing trees, digging holes, running
I
around.
And
Yeah.
and so many moms feel shame, and I'm going to finish with this, with having a child that's ADHD. They're like so shameful. They have to go, oh, I got to go put them on Adderall. I got, because they don't do this and they're not getting straight A's and they're not doing that. And I'm like, are you kidding me? That's their superhero. They're a powerful being. Don't go push it down and make them be like what society wants them to be. They're going to be the rulers and the kings, you know,
Yes.
and
I
the
love it.
queens that like we
Yes, exactly. So many of us queens out here, us ADHD sober queens.
well,
Yeah, no, what?
it has been such a pleasure getting to know you, and I hope you'll come on again. I can't wait to see what you're going to do in the future. It's been
Oh,
so awesome.
absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Elizabeth. It's been so lovely to see you and meet you, and let's stay connected.
We definitely will. Now, if you guys are listening and you want to get in touch with Georgie, I'm going to have all of her information in the description. So go click on her link and you can go follow her directly on Instagram. You can get her email and follow her wherever you would like to. And if you want to reach out to me, you can reach me at elizabeth@elizabethchance.com. And for one, I want you all to know that you are not alone. Please subscribe to my channel if you like what you hear, and share it with your friends. And until next time, everybody, keep getting busy living sober.